This is America in Space, a weekly news and information program on current events dealing with the space industry.
Welcome, and thanks for joining me today. I'm Dawn Meyer, Space Coast News Editor. Intuitive Machines landed the first American soft landing on the moon in over 50 years on February the 22nd, 2024. The IM-1 lander, called Odysseus, carried 6 NASA science instruments to the South Pole region of the moon as part of the agency's Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLPS, initiative and the Artemis campaign. It was a successful landing with a few hiccups. I watched it live on NASA TV. The team of Intuitive Machines, NASA, and other partners overcame most of the issues for a successful landing and mission. Steve Altemus, the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Intuitive Machines, explains a bit more about the landing.
Piecing together what happened at landing, we received telemetry. If you remember, on the evening of landing, we had no communication signal and then a weak signal. And in our consoles, the data was up to a point and then frozen until that communication was restored. So we had an indication that we had landed and we were upright with that stale data. And when we came back and looked at it, when we restored the communications, we noticed that we were getting the IMU telling us we see gravity more in the Z direction than in the X direction. Well, then we did a reconstruction where we actually calculated, based the trajectory, and the flight dynamics guys calculated that we actually came down just short of our landing site at a higher elevation than where our landing site was going to be. About a 1.5 kilometer difference between the ellipse of uncertainty for our landing and where we touched down. That elevation was higher, so we came in with more downward velocity and we came with more horizontal velocity. And so we hit harder and sort of skidded along the way. And we see that disruption in the regolith from the LRO data that we've been able to get from LRO and ASU. And that discoloration says that we came down with the engine firing because the automated flight manager had not moded to where it was trying to sense and shut down the engine. We saw a spike when we touched down in the engine combustion chamber. That was like if you shut off the full thrust by landing on the surface. So we know the engine belt contacted the surface. The landing gear took the bulk of the load, and we broke 1 or 2 possibly landing gear. And so we sat there upright with the engine firing for a period of time. And then as it wound down, the vehicle just gently tipped over. And in our simulation with 1/6 gravity, we showed that it took about 2 seconds. And we landed on a 12-degree slope. And then that 12-degree slope, compounded with the helium tank underneath or a radio shelf, would put us at an angle that's approximately 30 degrees off the surface. And we have that photo now to confirm that's the orientation. We also know the roll orientation when we were going to set the high gain antenna towards Earth and the solar arrays for the sun. We know that roll worked, but we know when we landed, the top deck solar array was shadowed and we weren't generating power with the top deck solar array, so we got that orientation right. So those were all the parameters that had to unfold over time to get us a good understanding of where we came. And then just today we have this picture of us leaning gently on the surface.
Because Odysseus is not at an optimal orientation for solar arrays, it will have to be shut down for the lunar night. Altemus continued with the plans for Odysseus and its mission.
Well, I think what we're going to do is kind of tuck Odie in for the cold night of the moon and see if we can't wake them up here when we get the solar noon here in about 3 weeks. So we know through that we are degrading in power, and we expect that within about 5 hours or so from now is when we will be at a point where we will no longer have commanding or telemetry coming down. We are going to leave the computers and the power system in a place where we can wake it up and do this development test objective to actually try to ping it with an antenna and see if we can't wake it up once it gets power again. So that's the plan. And if you recall, the whole idea of this mission was not to live as long as you could on the surface. This mission was intended as a scout and a pilot mission to go land on the surface, collect the data, and then the cold of night was going to take the lander where it would sit there quietly for the rest of the time. We accomplished that. And so now, extending to get additional data beyond that planned mission end and quiet power down of Odysseus, we expect that there may be another opportunity here in a couple of weeks to take a look at it again. So no eulogies planned, only celebration and cheering.
It was amazing watching the team troubleshoot problems in real time. I look forward to more lunar missions in the near future. Thank you for joining me. Listen each Tuesday for This Week in Space with John Gomez. And join me every Friday for America in Space. From the Florida Space Coast, I'm Dawn Meyer, Space Coast News Editor for About Space Today.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to share our program with your family and friends and follow us on Facebook. Join us each week for news and information on America in Space.